In the lead up to November's presidential election in the United States, groups on the right and left are sounding the alarm at the influence of money on US politics. My guest today knows a lot about that. At the height of his career, he made millions as a career lobbyist in Washington, wining, dining and influencing lawmakers. His fall from grace was dramatic, seeing him publicly disgraced and imprisoned for fraud and bribery. A free man once again, Jack Abramoff now says he's a reformed man, lobbying to correct what he describes as a corrupt system where he says his behaviour was and continues to be commonplace. Is he trying to make amends for his past or put the blame on others? Jack Abramoff, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, Time magazine famously described you as the man who bought Washington. You were known as arguably the most powerful lobbyist in Washington, a man who could get legislation introduced, changed, or even scrapped, a man who was making millions and millions of dollars. But then you went to jail. Now you live a modest lifestyle with your family. You say you're a radio talk show host. Do you miss the old life?
Well, I probably miss some of the old action, but I don't miss it enough to try it again.
Well, you were born in New Jersey. You were raised in California to a father who worked for a credit card company, a former beauty queen mother. But as a youngster, you worked for the college Republicans. You made quite a name for yourself there. So why did you choose to leave active politics, if you like, and eventually choose lobbying as your career?
Well, actually, I left after serving as head of the college Republicans and then moving on to head President Reagan's grassroots lobby on Capitol Hill. I actually left politics to go become a movie producer. I spent about 8 to 10 years producing films and re-entered politics as a lobbyist. Actually, lobbying is in America part of the political scene. And so I spent about a decade after I re-entered being a lobbyist.
Why?
I beg your pardon?
Why? Why choose lobbying? Why become a lobbyist?
Well, it's interesting. I wanted to get back in. I missed politics when I was making films, although there's certainly politics that goes on when one is making motion pictures in Hollywood. But I missed the Washington scene, and I didn't feel that the appropriate entry point was through a campaign or running for something. And the opportunity came up through a friend of mine to join one of the lobbying firms. I took on the responsibilities of helping clients in their mini political battles, which is what lobbying is really in Washington. And so that's how I got back in.
Well, you describe in your book about capital punishment, about your life as a lobbyist in the early years. You do sense a kind of a pride or excitement that perhaps you still feel for your former work. I mean, when you talk about setting up Team Abramoff at the company Preston Gates lobbying firm, you say our team eventually included some of the greatest minds in the policy business, as well as some of the roughest, toughest, street-smart killers who ever walked the halls of well-heeled law firms. I mean, that sounds like the script from one of your Hollywood movies, really, doesn't it?
I wish it were a script from one of my films. They might have done better in the box office, but unfortunately, it was real life. And, I write in the book about it. I don't necessarily laud those days, but I try to describe it and describe the feelings that I had. And they were feelings of exhilaration while I participated in it.
For another example, our idea of a successful day was obliterating our clients' enemies.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the modus operandi that we had. When we were constantly engaged 24 hours a day in political battles on behalf of the clients. And these were mini wars. And so when we won, and we would go in to win very thoroughly, we were exhilarated, we were delighted, obviously, and when we lost, we were despondent. Although, oddly, over 10 years, we only lost once, so ultimately.
Well, describe for us, though, the lifestyle, really, as a lobbyist. I mean, just to quote Time magazine again, they describe you as the flamboyant power broker who used to send lawmakers and their staffs on junkets around the world, entertain them back in Washington with golf outings, free meals at your expensive restaurant, concerts and games enjoyed from luxury skyboxes protesters that you maintained, says the magazine, at nearly every arena and stadium in town. You don't deny this, though, in your book, do you?
No. That is indeed the lifestyle of an active lobbyist in Washington. Lobbying really is two things. One is access, and the second is persuasion. But the access in Washington often comes with purveying and conveying financial benefits to the lawmakers and their staff, the people who are public servants. That includes playing golf, that includes travel, that includes meals, and it certainly includes political contributions. And so of that activity, I was probably at the razor's edge. I did and overdid everything I could to maintain the access that our 40 lobbyists, the 40 lobbyists who work for me, maintained within the Congress.
Well, I mean, in your book, there's a sort of feeling of inevitability about your modus operandi. You, as if you were carried away, you didn't realise your actions. I mean, you've also said in an essay, I never contemplated that payments made to congressmen or their interest groups were really just bribes, but they were. Can we really believe that you, such a successful career man, didn't realise that what you were doing was wrong?
Well, I'll go even further. I think most people who are still engaged in the system have not come to the epiphany that I came to. People who are involved in Washington in terms of making campaign contributions to public servants or providing them meals or whatever they're giving to them don't feel, as I didn't feel, that they're bribing them. They feel that that's just the way business is done, that they're engaged in relationships with them. They're, in fact, they're social friends. And they don't really come to the conclusions that I only came to, by the way, unfortunately and shamefully for me, only came to when it was all over. In the midst of it all, I didn't for a minute think that this was bribery. And I'm not certain, by the way, had I come to that intellectual conclusion, as I should have, by the way, had I come to that conclusion, perhaps I might not have even treated it as a serious notion. That's the big problem here. And that's one of the problems in terms of fixing the system, that people here feel that it's A-OK, that it's perfectly fine to do these kinds of things. And they're not being immoral. They're not doing things that are, for the most part, illegal. And so, therefore, they continue to do them.
Well, let's have a look at what you did do specifically. Eventually, you admitted guilt on a number of charges, including fraud, bribery, tax evasion. You went to jail. What really grabbed the headlines, though, was your relationship with a number of Native American tribes you admitted to defrauding. What exactly did they hire you for at the time?
Well, I was hired by the tribes to do two things. One is to protect their interests in Washington, which we did without fail, except in one case. And I was also hired eventually to protect their interests in their individual states. I should note, by the way, that what I pled guilty to and what I was guilty of was in the efforts in the states, not revealing to the clients formally that indeed I was sharing in the profit of the companies that I brought in to work for them, even though I was, by the way, working with these companies and in many cases designed those efforts. Well, I think that my relationship with the tribe has unfortunately been blown a little bit. The tribes have been blown a little bit out of proportion in the media, but that was specifically what I pled to and was guilty of.
Let's have a look at that sum of money, though.
Sure.
The Committee on Indian Affairs report in 2006 said you and your business partner in this venture, Mike Scanlon, collected about $66 million from 6 Native American tribes between 2001 and 2003. I mean, that deserves a headline. I mean, that is a huge amount of money.
Well, first of all, the committee report in the Senate was extremely politicized and very inaccurate. First of all, that sum itself was actually less than we were paid in fees by more than 6 tribes. We had more than 6 tribes that were represented. But understand that the efforts that we engaged in were extremely active political battles, many of them costing each time several $million. We engaged in them over and over and over again to save, ultimately, as we added up at the end, $6.8 billion worth of their revenue and worth of their income and value. So at the end of the day, I believe the tribes felt, the people I worked for, not the people who necessarily took over the tribes and were the political enemies of the people I did work for, but the people I worked for felt that we did indeed do a fine job for them. What I did do that was wrong, and what I've served time for and pled guilty to, was taking away from them the right to make a decision as to whether to engage us based on the full facts. And what I didn't do was inform them properly publicly that I was in fact being compensated by companies that I recommended to them.
Okay, well, you describe how you believe that the tribes felt, but Bernie Sprague, who'd been a member of the tribal council of the Saginaw Chippewa in Michigan, said you defrauded his tribe out of millions of dollars. He said families and children, suffered much pain because of this man. He said you left a dark stain across the entire
Please, let me at least put some context in this. Bernie Sprague was part of the very opposition of the tribe that removed the tribal council that I worked for. He was in total opposition to them. He did everything he could to actually remove them from the tribe, let alone from the tribal council. He had his own agenda. He brought his own lobbyists in who he wanted to hire and wound up paying them in many cases more than we were paid. So again, the problem is when one mixes into the tribal politics, there are a lot of sides to this. I'm not, by the way, saying, and I don't ever say, that I didn't do things that were wrong. What I am saying is, though, that I try to focus on the things I actually did that were wrong, the things I pled to, and the things that I was punished for.
Well, you, frankly, I mean, you rubbish what Bernie Sprague said, but let's look at another tribe, the Tikar Tribe. The Committee on Indian Affairs said the $4.2 million paid to you and Mike Scanlon by the Tikar Tribe, whose case you did not manage to win, could have lasted the tribe another year. They say the tribe would have dedicated much of that money to education and to healthcare, and that they needed it very much. This is a very different picture to the one you paint about the billions of dollars that they're earning and the revenue of the casinos and so on. It's not about luxury, it's about basics, they say.
Well, you pointed out correctly that that was the effort that we in fact lost. And indeed, we lost the effort. Unfortunately, the effort was rife with the very bribery that I pled to eventually, where we had a congressman who went to prison and a senator who didn't go to prison but went on to head the Motion Picture Association, both of whom received considerable funds from us from the tribe to change the law so that that tribe would have a casino opportunity in Texas. It didn't work, unfortunately. I put every effort I could into the very last days of my being a lobbyist to reversing that. We weren't successful in doing it, and that in fact was our one failure in terms of the lobbying efforts.
You say in your book, and with regard to the tribe, that you always did your best for your clients and that you were very sincere in that. However, the emails revealed between you and Mike Scanlon reveal not a very high opinion that you held of those Native American tribes. In March 13, 2002, for example, referring to the Saginaw Chippewas, you refer to them as those effing sag chips. You say they're plain stupid. You refer to them as morons. Is that the way to talk about your
Look,
clients?
I should say, I sent 850,000 emails. I was a very rough player. Unfortunately, I hope I've changed myself over the 8 years that I've been through this process. But just in terms of going back to that, what the committee did not pull out were the emails that I'd sent about everybody, unfortunately. I was a very rough player. It wasn't just about my clients that I spoke very roughly and very sweetly, by the way. Out of 850,000 emails, there were 50 that were embarrassing.
Are you sorry?
I'm ashamed about it. Hold on, let me finish my comment. I'm ashamed about those emails. I'm sorry I sent them. I'm also sorry that I sent to my wife sometimes emails about our kids being morons. Unfortunately, I was not careful in my emails to be, as everyone should be, aware of the fact that ultimately you could wind up reading your emails one day on the front page of the paper. I wound up reading those emails on the front page of the paper. I'm terribly sorry about those emails. They are a small part of the effort in terms of, and should reflect in a small way in terms of my relationship with the tribes. None of the positive emails, by the way, that I sent, and there were thousands of them.
But if you forgive me, because we're short of time, let's move on from the emails. You say you're sorry about the emails. Are you sorry in general about how you treated the tribes, for defrauding the tribes, which you admitted to? Are you sorry for that? Have you said sorry?
I'm sorry exactly for what I did that was wrong. And what I did that was wrong was that I didn't inform the tribes, as I should have, that I was sharing in the profits of the companies that I recommended to them. But I'm certainly not sorry for winning every effort on their behalf. I'm not sorry for working day and night on their behalf. I'm not sorry for the efforts that I made to improve their relationships on Capitol Hill and elsewhere. I'm not sorry for any of those things. I'm sorry for what I did that was wrong. People who ask me to be sorry for things I didn't do, I'm going to be very disappointing to them. I did plenty that was wrong, by the way, and plenty to be sorry for, but I'm not going to, as no one should, take on to be sorry for things that they didn't do.
Now, you owe the tribes money. You
Right.
owe them according
Tribes
to
and others, yes.
Yeah, but the tribe's more than $20 million. But Tom Rogers, who's the tribal advocate who did much of the groundwork to expose your work with the tribe, says, we're not asking for tens of millions of dollars. We want true atonement. You can't have true redemption without true atonement. And what he says you should do is to go to the poorest reservation in the country. He says you should ask to work with the elders and the children there without a camera crew or reporters, quietly.
Well, actually, ironically, Mr. Rogers, who, by the way, was a rival lobbyist to us and was defeated by us, but his suggestion was something that I actually asked to do at the beginning of this, to go work on a reservation, to sweep floors, to do whatever, and I was turned down. But the fact is, I have the efforts that we engaged in over about a decade at the time that I was a lobbyist did more good than harm by far for Indian country. We prevented them from losing billions and billions of dollars in federal taxation and egregious federal legislation to take over those tribes. We were at times solely responsible for stopping that. That was the job I was hired for.
Will you pay
People
them
like
back?
Tom Rogers, who I did not represent and had no relationship with me or my tribes, they have their opinions. Some of them have agendas. I've certainly apologized to the people that I've offended.
But will you pay them
the
back?
exact people I've offended.
Will you
of course
pay them
I'm
back?
paying. I'm trying. I'm trying, sure.
How much have you paid them back so far?
Well, I'm just out of prison, and felons don't exactly have all the financial opportunities that one would have. But
You're paid for your speaking engagements?
I am, and portions of those monies, large portions of everything I earn, goes to the restitution that I owe.
What proportion?
Everything that I earn, every dollar that I earn, and every dollar that I spend is overseen by the Justice Department and the courts. So I don't think people have to worry that I'm squirreling away money. I wish I were able to, but I'm not. I'm dedicated to paying back the restitution amount. It's a very large amount. It's $44 million. I don't know if I'll be able to earn that much in my lifetime, but I'm certainly going to try.
There are others, though, who also question the sincerity of your remorse in your books and in your public speaking. For example, our Jeffrey Smith, a former Washington Post journalist, he's now the managing editor for national security at the Center for Public Integrity. He writes that reading his book, we're left with an odd mixture of candid revelation, defiant celebration, and score settling, all stuck to a postscript of avowed remorse. What do you make of those comments?
Well, Jeffrey Smith, again, unfortunately, has part of an agenda here. I'm sorry to keep saying that, but you have to understand, there are people who've been involved in this for 8 or 10 years who are on one side or another of this thing. He wrote a review. He actually spent time writing articles about me in the Washington Post. He was part of the team there that got the Pulitzer Prize. They were very offended that some of the story they got was wrong, and they were corrected by me in my book. And Jeffrey Smith wrote a hostile review of my book. It actually wound up selling more of my books than anything else. It's hard for me to respond to all of these allegations because the fact is some of them are just absolutely baseless. In terms of my book being a score settling, I invite Jeffrey Smith and I invite anyone who reads my book to please tell me where in my book I settle scores. In fact, if anything, I've been criticized profusely by the Sunlight Foundation and others that I haven't settled enough scores, meaning I haven't brought out enough detail about things that people did.
Okay.
I'm not in it for this. The purpose of writing my book was to be able to tell the story of what happened, number one, and number two, to tell America what is still going on there and how I did it so that we can find a way to undo this system.
And we will move on to that in just a moment. But first, if I could ask you, your faith is obviously very important to you. You write about it a lot in your book. It's evident also from the personal choices you made. You chose to become more of an observant Jew than your parents were. And despite the 24/7 cutthroat business that you were in and were obviously dedicated to, you observed the Jewish Sabbath, you didn't write, you didn't phone, you didn't get into cars or send emails. How did your behavior at the time fit with your religious faith then?
Well, I'm somebody who strives to be more religious, and like everybody who strives to attain a higher standard than maybe they have, I'm also a sinner. I'm not a saint. I'm indeed a sinner. And each of us struggle between, as we say in the religious world, between the angels and the apes, being pulled down into the muck and the mire and rising up into the more ethereal behavior. So I, as an individual, had those struggles too. I've had those struggles my whole life. I intend probably will have them the rest of my life.
So, but how does it?
And
How
I
does
just
it
do
make?
my very best.
Pardon me. How does it make you feel when RabbiAllahu Stern, who's a leading commentator on Jewish religious issues in the United States, he's an assistant professor of religious studies at Yale University. After you pleaded guilty in 2006, he described you as a blot on the Jewish world, and he said that the rabbis and religious figures supporting you and living off what he described as your dirty money were an embarrassment to Judaism.
Well, I don't know who this man is, to be honest with you, but frankly, that is not the statement of an Orthodox or religious Jew. To say such a thing about a fellow Jew, especially one who's come forward and is trying to do repentance and trying to repent and trying to make something better. I don't know who he is, and frankly, I'm not sure I need to comment about him.
Now, while you were earning all of those millions of dollars, you did give a lot of money to charity. You say in your book that you were giving away upwards of 80% of your income for good causes and to help people. But also in your book, you describe how in your first job interview to become a lobbyist, you said categorically that you could never fight for something you didn't believe in. You said, I wouldn't do it for all the money in the world. Could you now stand there and say you stayed true to that?
Yes, I can. I didn't take on one cause as I was a lobbyist that I didn't believe in, and I turned down many that were quite lucrative that, in fact, were things I didn't believe in.
Would you say that the lobbying business has changed since you were operating as a lobbyist?
Not really. I think there's been some changes on the margins, but the modus operandi of most lobbyists is pretty much the same. They have more hurdles to get around as a consequence of my scandal, but for the most part, the system is still intact.
Now, I mean, after you were sentenced, some reform was introduced, the Reform Act of 2006, various measures to clarify US lawmakers' relationships with lobbyists, including a cut on gifts from private sources. You've been pretty scathing about those reforms, though.
Well, I've been scathing. I basically have said that they don't go far enough. They don't do what's necessary. And what's necessary really to root out this kind of corruption, the corruption I was involved in, the corruption that goes on, is to fully sever the link, financial link, between lobbyists and special interests and the public servants. And it doesn't do that. I think that the people who worked on that are very good people. I'm working with them now on trying to push the ball further down the court. But I believe that they tried to get what they felt they could get at the time. Understand that every effort that's done in Washington, D.C., everything that is proposed has got to go through a Congress whose own members are probably looking, many of them, to the future of them becoming lobbyists. So they're going to be very careful about changing rules that will benefit them later.
Now, when you were sentenced, Judge Ellen S. Hovell said you've impacted seriously the public confidence in the integrity of the government. These activities corrupted the political process and deprived the public of the honest services of their own public officials, both in the legislature and executive branch. And yet you say you weren't alone in that.
Well, I don't think any sensible person could say that I alone did that. I mean, it would be a total foolish reading of American history and American present. I mean, I participated. I was far more egregious, perhaps, than others, but I was part of a system. I didn't make these things up.
And yet,
I learned them as I went along.
We're running out of time here, so if I can just say that two former presidents of the American League of Lobbyists, Paul Miller and David Wenholt, wrote a letter to the daily congressional newspaper The Hill in 2011 saying, our message to Mr. Abramoff is, don't paint us all with your brush. We do not all engage in this type of activity. 99.9% of us represent our clients ethically and accountably and do not go to jail for it.
Well, I agree, by the way. I say that in my speeches. I said that in my book. I say that in my columns. On my radio show, I say it everywhere. Most lobbyists are doing just fine. Most lobbyists don't use the kind of things I did. I don't think their number is correct, 99.9%, but I would say 90% of the lobbyists are likely to be behaving properly. The problem isn't them. But don't forget, there are 30,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. So let's say 90% are just fine. You only need a few dozen to be behaving as I behaved to have a problem, and we have far more than a few dozen.
Jack Abramoff, thank you very much indeed for being on HARDtalk.
Pleasure.